Some things to note as you go into watching Rear Window, Hitchcock's film from 1953. Rear Window stars two actors who were actually in several other Hitchcock films. We have Jimmy Stewart, who was in Rope, as we saw, also The Man Who Knew Too Much and Vertigo, and then also Grace Kelly, who was in Dial M for Murder and To Catch a Thief. Both actors are really wonderful. I love both of them, and they're interesting for maybe different reasons. Stewart starred in Vertigo, as I mentioned, and he really is just a phenomenal actor. And the role in Vertigo was one of the most complicated and interesting protagonists of all of Hitchcock's films. And Grace Kelly is really wonderful too. Hitchcock was always disappointed that he could not work with Grace Kelly on more films than he did, but she went off and got married to a real life prince, Prince of Monaco. And she herself too expressed how much she really loved working with Hitchcock and wished they could have done more films together. In any case, both actors are really wonderful in the roles here in Rear Window. The film was based on a couple of different sources. It was based first on a short story from Cornell Woolrich, but Hitchcock, again, as usual, took very loose inspiration from that story. And then the story was also inspired by two real life police cases in England, which I don't want to give too many details about those away to you because it will spoil the film. But Hitchcock, as you will see when you read the Truffaut interviews, Hitchcock will describe what those two cases are, so you'll get a little bit more information. In terms of critical opinion, this film is really widely regarded as one of Hitchcock's very best, among the top two or three or so. Robin Wood calls this film Hitchcock's masterpiece. Truffaut calls it his favorite, along with Notorious, which, again, I would recommend Notorious. It's not one of the ones that we had time to watch in our class, but I would definitely recommend it. But again, this film is widely regarded by both Wood and Truffaut, as well as many other critics, as a really, really amazing film. Hitchcock himself really loved doing this film too, partly because of the technical challenge of it, in which we are basically confined to one set and to one person's POV, and almost the entire film we're just in one location the entire time. This location, it was the largest indoor set that was ever built by Paramount up until this time. But notably, again, one of the technical reasons why Hitchcock loved doing this film was he called it the purest expression of a cinematic idea. And what he means by that is related to the idea of montage, which we discussed relative to Rope. And that, of course, was a film that didn't use montage. But as a reminder, montage is how a filmmaker generally produces a story using images more than anything else, and specifically thinking about how the pairing of certain images or the juxtaposing of certain images is the thing that creates the emotion or the thought or the story. So the images, not by themselves, but put next to each other, create the story. And Hitchcock offers an example in this film of how our perception of what a character is thinking depends almost exclusively on what we see the character looking at. So, for example, if we see an image of a little dog, and then we cut to Jimmy Stewart's character smiling, we imagine Stewart to be a kindly person. But if we see an image of a woman undressing and then we cut to Stewart's character smiling, it can be the exact same smile that he used when he smiled referencing the dog, but we think of Stewart as a lustful old man. The innocence is gone. And nothing has really changed. Even the smile perhaps has not changed, but the juxtaposition of the different images have changed. So when you cut from a dog to Stewart smiling, or a dog or a woman to Stewart smiling, then the meaning of his smile changes because the images next to each other is what creates that meaning. So, as watching this film for how the juxtaposition of images together affects our perception of a scene or affects our sense of the characters or even our a sense of the emotion of the scene. This is a film that is about, on some level, voyeurism. And we'll talk a lot more about that, I hope, when we're able to discuss the film. But to set it up now, we can think about the theme of voyeurism here in a couple of different ways. First, there's a clear parallel to filmmaking and to watching films. A filmmaker is, on some level, a voyeur, someone who was watching things through a lens. But we as audience members are also voyeurs because we watch what's playing out on screen and we're not involved, but we want what we are watching to keep happening. A voyeur is by definition someone who is a watcher, someone who's removed from the action, but someone who wants what they are seeing to continue. This film involves a character who is a photographer, who is very literally watching people. He is a voyeur. So, and we also interestingly identify with his point of view. So, in a way, we're invited to consider this film both from the perspective of film goers and also filmmakers, because we are film goers, but we're identifying with a character who, in a way, is a filmmaker, as a person who's holding a camera watching things happen. Something else to consider about the voyeurism: some critics in cinema history have accused the film of being just awful and immoral because they felt that the film is endorsing voyeurism. But others have vigorously defended the film and saying, no, 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 it's not endorsing voyeurism, it's actually critiquing voyeurism. So I'll be really curious to hear what you think. I kind of personally think that the film falls somewhere between those two extremes, and that Hitchcock is giving us his usual complexity and moral ambiguity in terms of the whole idea of voyeurism. But you will need to consider that for yourself, and I will again be very curious to hear what you think about that. Also, watch for the thematic mirroring in this film. So, we're following this character who is watching other people, and to a large extent, at least kind of psychological, I think we could see that what he sees mirrors his own desires and his fears, and even his possible selves or the possible lives back to him. So what he sees, he interprets kind of based on his own feelings and experiences and fears, but perhaps in a way that isn't clear to himself. So the images that he's watching of people living out their lives, those are kind of possible lives or possible selves he could have, and he sort of reacts to those things differently as if those are kind of options for him. Also, watch for just visual storytelling generally, how Hitchcock not only juxtaposes images, but how he just develops, how he uses his camera to tell us things. The very opening scene, for example, is a masterclass in telling us everything we need to know about the context and about our main character without a single word of dialogue. Besides the theme of voyeurism, too, there is this second major theme to watch for and think about, and that's related to this theme of love and relationships. The film is, on some level, an interrogation of that theme, and the theme of voyeurism is tied into that in interesting and kind of complicated ways. If you are a voyeur, you are watching, right? You're not intimately engaged with whatever it is you're watching because you're a watcher, you're passive. So there's that tension in the film between a genuine intimacy and vulnerability that you would get when you are actually engaged with something and you're active in something, and then a retreat into voyeurism and watching, and a passive position of distance and power. So the film kind of presents to us, I think, two ways of being in a way, sort of a genuine engagement, vulnerability, and intimacy, as opposed to voyeurism and passivity, which gives you more power, technically speaking. So there's an interesting dynamic there, especially given the fact that there is a romantic relationship at the center of the film, which our main character, played by Jimmy Stewart, has very complicated feelings about. Also, when we get there, or when you get there, consider the ending of the film. Like Hitchcock endings often are, there is a resolution, but we might ask what actually has been resolved given the things that the film raises and the issues and ideas that the film presents us with.